Are disclosures getting out of control is the title of this session. We know that robust environmental reporting is essential. It helps to minimize risk. It helps to support investors in their decision making. But as the scope and scale of disclosures is getting more and more complex, we ask ourselves, are we just reporting for compliance, or are we doing this for a reason? So I know some of you, we feel like you're drowning in data and you're drowning in pressure to report and disclose all this stuff. So it's about striking the right balance, I guess, and that's some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. How can businesses extract real value from their disclosure as opposed to it being just a box ticking exercise? And how can companies engage with CDP in a way that strengthens both their sustainability strategies and their competitive edge? So we're going to get into all that stuff with Sherry and CDP, which is an organisation that's been around for God knows how long now in terms of been at the
I know how long, 25 years this year.
5 years, there you go. Yeah. So Sherry, for those very few people out there, I'm sure, that don't know CDP, just a quick, give us an insight into what CDP does, what it stands for, and what you're doing.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about what sometimes is considered a bit of an institution in the environmental sphere. So CDP started life as the Carbon Disclosure Project 25 years ago. And what we are today is the global disclosure platform for climate and nature data. That creates a neutral space to ask the questions to corporates and cities, states, and regions, which encompasses over 2/3 of the world's market capitalization that report into us, as well as 1,200 cities, states, and regions. So high density, high impact, and a lot of questions. So I think that some of the audience smiles and knows just how many. But hopefully, in this discussion, we'll explain a little bit about where we're going for the next 25 years, how it is that we think that the ecosystem has changed, and how proud we are at having been there right at the beginning to create an ecosystem that data can be used.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. So let's start with the point that I made at the outset then. How does CDP help companies ensure that what they're doing is kind of impact-driven, has real benefit, as opposed to just being a sort of an admin burden?
Yeah. So I think that it's fair to say that 25 years ago, CDP was banging the drum. Disclosure is good. Transparency is good. If you have data, you can use it. It needs to be decision useful. What you can measure, you can manage. And we continue to do that because there are parts of the world that certainly are still on that initial journey of understanding that data is going to be important. However, I think CDP now has a separate extra requirement in terms of what we do as a global impact-driven NGO. It's to bring down the burden of reporting and up the benefit. And this is because, actually, data has become super popular. It is being used. It is being sought after. Questions are being asked. So part of our job has got to be to create a write once and use it many culture. Because having less data is not what the world wants. What it wants is to be able to have comparable data that's comprehensive and that companies know why it is that they're investing in being able to surface it. So what do we see in terms of why companies are actually doing this? Why are they surfacing data and answering questions? It really comes down to simple. It's three things. Access to capital. Investors, both private and public, are seeking this data. Business efficiency. So business efficiencies, including your customer wanting to ask for it. It's in RFPs. It's how it is that you might think about how you plan for your new innovations. How is it that your product is going to evolve? And finally, compliance. So access to capital, business efficiencies, and compliance. It's the ABCs. If we do not get this right, we're actually ignoring the fact that businesses are really making sure that those three things are being used for business purposes. So none of those things are about being able to save the planet. And that's because actually environmentalism is only one small part of this. It's actually economics that are driving the surfacing of that data. And the reality is that actually most companies that report to us are seeing that they are actually making gains in their emissions because they're taking business decisions. One of my favorite stats is that within 2 years of the first time a company reports to CDP, their emissions go down by 7 to 10%. That's a fact. So there is a real environmental benefit, but actually the economic benefit is what the companies are telling us that that's what they're doing this for.
Yeah, that is really compelling. What about companies that are grappling with multiple different frameworks? What's your advice to them, whether it's TCFD or CRSD or CDP? In fact, what's your advice to those guys?
Yeah, so CDP is a voluntary system. We're not a standard. But what we have done over many years, we've been aligning with these standards because they are a use case for the data. So it makes perfect sense. So we are 100% aligned with TCFD, have been since 2018. And as of last year, we're also 100% aligned with ISSB. So when you've got multiple requirements for your data, in terms of standards, in terms of just that C element we talked about before, trying to write it once and being able to extract it to use it many places, that drives efficiency. It also drives consistency across what it is you're putting into the market. And again, that's something we see CDP as being a tool to be able to provide that platform. So why is CDP different? Like, why don't you just go and use your accounting software and off you go with trying to extract data? The reality is that we work with over 700 of the world's largest financial institutions, representing $142 trillion worth of assets, that want the data from CDP in order to be able to drive investment decisions. If you partner that with the fact that we also are really proud to be working with over 300 of the world's supply chain owners, which represent over $6.5 trillion worth of buying power, those are that second point, that business efficiency and thinking about, your customer asking you for that data. We are creating that disclosure platform that you can use it multiple times, and that's how your stakeholder wants to receive the data. So again, I think that's where we, sometimes maybe we lost our voice, over the last 5 years, and, we've been seen as being maybe demanding about our questions. These aren't our questions. These are the questions of a business stakeholder, and it's our job to make sure that we're delivering them consistently and listening to the market about how we can make that more and more efficient.
Yeah. Going back to your stat there about the 7 to 10% in that first year, that is incredibly compelling. Can you give us a sense then of how companies are using their disclosures to actually affect change and get those emissions down?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a example, because it's always nice to start with a case study example. So ThyssenKrupp, the international steel and technology company, they have been investing 3 billion euros through to 2027 in sustainable business opportunities. And they're using their A score with CDP. So CDP produces a score on the basis of how transparent you are as a business in order to be able to secure that financing. So there is a direct relationship by you being able to be transparent and disclose and having actually a financial benefit to your business. So there's one example. Another example that I really enjoy is a really sort of dynamic triangle. CDP is one element. But HSBC and Walmart are two other sides of that triangle. And what do we do together? Is that HSBC provides a lower cost of capital to those suppliers of Walmart that disclose through CDP. And they utilize the scores that CDP produces and the raw data in order to be able to lower the cost of capital for those that are a part of that disclosure chain. That is not about being woke. That is about good business, and it really hits the bottom line. And when those things merge together, I think we have real evidence that the world is thinking about ways of directing capital in a way that's going to be a sustainable future because it's good business.
Yeah. We've got a couple of questions come in from our audience. Is CDP data becoming unusable now that the level of granularity is so high and the format so rigid?
Great question. Would love to have input from the world, from those that use us, those that don't use us, those that are our supply chain members, our investors. So we're always adapting. This year, we're having a year of stability. And the reason for that is we've worked really closely with the ISSB. And we've been working hard to make sure that the questions that we asked last year are, on the whole, the same as this year, in order to be able to create that consistency. ISSB is not changing their questions, neither are we. So the question is, how about that granularity? I think the thing that CDP needs to do better is to surface, as soon as a company hits the system, why we are asking that question. So pivoting not only to say, this is a good question and we know why, but we need to share to the market why that is being used. What is the use case for that question? And when we talk about granularity, often that comes to either a facility level or thinking about sort of deeper emissions statistics, depending on product level or where things are produced or geographic footprints. These are being demanded by the investors and by the supply chain members. I think the thing we're not doing so well is sharing that with the world. Because if you understood where it is that data was going to be used, you have a better decision. Do I answer that? Do I not answer that? And actually, the world is changing so that we need to be able to be much more flexible about how that works.
Yeah. The world is changing. More regulation, more alignment on sustainability reporting. How will things evolve then in the next, say, 5-10 years from now?
Oh, goodness. If I had that crystal ball, I think everybody's got a different version of their crystal ball, especially in the course of the last 3 or 4 months. If we're talking about regulation, CDP is very much backing mandatory regulation, right? Creating more data to be used efficiently. That's a good thing. That's what we've been doing for 25 years. However, I think that what we are also banging the drum about is harmonization and trying to create some interoperability between these standards that are asking for data, not only amongst the compliance use case, but how do you create that interoperability with what is being asked by your customer and what is being asked by perhaps some of the other parts of the ecosystem that want this information, including the companies themselves trying to drive good business. So if we think about where regulation is coming from, CDP looks at it from a point of view of, we need to think about this from a data level. So the questions and the standards, if you think about it, we all agree on the principles. We need data in order to make good decisions for a sustainable business future. Great. What happens then? So you've got frameworks that sit underneath those principles, things like the TCFD, or increasingly like the TNFD, Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosures. And then you've got a layer that's the standards. So an ISSB would fit into there, CSRD, the alphabet soup we know well sits in that layer. And what sits under that is the data. And if we can continue to encourage more interoperability at the standards point, there is also an opportunity at the data point, which is in our gift, to be able to make sure that the data that's being disclosed by companies are able to be really well mapped. And just last week, we actually put into the market a mapping with EFRAG, who is behind the CSRD. And of course, we're keeping in mind what is happening with the omnibus rule regulation going through. But being able to continue to be transparent about how questions are mapping, I think that is actually where we're driving a bit more efficiency, we hope.
On the interoperability question, we have a very specific one. How is CDP going to be interoperable with CSRD? Is the new guidance 100% interoperable?
So it's not 100% interoperable. If you think about it, it's a bit like a Venn diagram. So CDP has a bank of questions that encompasses not only what investors or what a certain jurisdiction is looking to achieve, but it also includes questions that certain supply chain owners, certain supply chains, the owners of sort of a large swathe of, for example, the retail supply chain, the telecom supply chain are asking for. So that is the bank of questions that CDP is asking corporates. EFRAG is the group that is creating the questions for the CSRD. So there's a Venn diagram overlap. And actually last week we revealed that over 65% of the environmental questions are overlapped with the CDP questions. So it's not 100%. And remember, CDP is an environmental, climate, and nature disclosure platform. There are other questions in CSRD that are more social related and things that we don't capture. So when we're driving efficiency, our goal is to maximize the efficiency within what it is that we specialize on. We're seen as the climate and nature experts. We want to be really fulfilling that obligation. And if actually at the end of a CSS or a CDP question bank, you come out to 65, 70% of CSRD and have to top that up, that's where we are at. Because again, that Venn diagram is not just two circles. It's CSRD, ISSB. My goodness, the nomenclature is crazy. But one of the key ones is that actually your customer is asking for this. And that is a circle, a Venn diagram circle we don't want to give up because we see that as one of the biggest drivers of disclosures. If your customer asks you for data, you're going to give it to them. And actually, we are seeing that as the biggest driver of disclosure, not compliance, not investors, over the course of the last 5 years.
It's customers. Interesting.
It's customers.
Interesting. In that context, then, can you give us a sense of how CDP is likely to evolve over the next year or so for your users? What sort of things are coming down the track to help them?
Well, we're going to do more mapping, and we're going to make that mapping really available to the marketplace. So the only way we're going to drive efficiency is to show what we already know in terms of that there is that question and what is it being used for, what are the use cases, etc. We're also driving a more efficient data collection system. Last year was a bit rough. Anyone who is in the audience that sort of was able to be part of it, thank you. And certainly sort of, CDP a year and a half ago was not a data company. We are on our way to being a data company. And certainly sort of through the course of last disclosure cycle, there was improvements as it went. And so we're starting in a better place this year. And we are dedicated to driving a more smooth and efficient system for our disclosures, our supply chain members, and our investors who all hit that system in different ways. So certainly that's an investment we're making. We're also making an investment in stability this year. As I said, the questionnaire itself is not going to change. Our methodology will be slightly tweaked, and that'll be coming out by the end of April. And we will be opening up the cycle with a significantly better turnover rate on inquiries. So we're going to set some service level agreements so that everybody really has that expectation of if they are getting stuck, which we hope will happen less and less, but that we are being more responsive. So that's this year. But I'm really more interested actually in talking about what happens after that. Because I think that traditionally CDP has had a questionnaire, right? People talk about the CDP questionnaire. There it is, have at it. Actually, the reality is that CDP needs to move with what the ecosystem needs, which is that this is not a questionnaire. This is a question bank. And that may seem like semantics, but the reality is if we are not able to get granular on the questions we ask and how that's mapped to use cases, we are not moving with the ecosystem and we're not sharing with the ecosystem what we know. For us, that disclosure system is driving change. It is driving action, but we need to share that with those that are spending the time using the system, surfacing the data, because it's not free. So if every dollar you spend on reporting is a dollar you don't spend on action, we need to be part of the solution there, not the burden.
So slightly connected to that, a question from somebody in the audience says, with the changes to the questionnaire and data collected in recent years, has there been any impact on data completeness and accuracy?
Yeah, a great question. As we grow, it's harder to answer that question because there's always a journey that companies are on. When you first start disclosing, you are not going to have as much quality or completeness in your disclosure as you would if you're 5, 6, 7, 10 years on. So again, it depends on, what the question is. If we're talking about first disclosures, We're seeing year on year more disclosures answering more questions, which, again, it just reinforces that journey. As soon as you start getting that muscle memory of GHG emissions, some of the basics in terms of governance, thinking about water usage, scarcity. Then you start moving on to more granular questions. And that's just a natural evolution that we've already seen. In terms of quality, I think that this year and what we're proposing for this coming year, we're seeing actually a opportunity with the technology to be able to call out where there's questionable quality right at the beginning point, as opposed to propagating that into the marketplace, which I understand. And again, I've only been with CDP for 18 months. I'm very honored to be able to sort of take the role at this point. But I understand that same quality driver didn't happen before. And that's something that we're dedicated to making sure works. And how are we able to do that? We're able to leverage technology. I think that, this stage talked a bit about AI, previously. That's not something that's foreign to us. We're thinking about how it is that you can really use the power of AI to be able to create a better quality. Think about sort of how it is you utilize that data. How is it that you create aggregate insights and an inspiration for companies to understand where they fit within sort of a continuum, either geographically, sectorally, or thinking more specifically about their value chains.
Yeah. And Sherry, when you consider all of your users, and you've got users across all different industries, some have just started, some have been doing it for lots of years. What are the traits of those users that are getting the best out of CDP, who are in the top rankings? What are the kind of character traits, if you like, of those companies?
Yeah, so we did this interesting study. I think it's interesting, but maybe that's just me being a geek. In January of this year, we partnered with the World Economic Forum and with Oliver Wyman to say, actually, let's look at the data from the last 5 years. And let's try and understand what are the leaders and what are the laggards. And how we define leaders and laggards is that what the leaders are the ones that are on track to meet their climate commitments and their targets, and the laggards are the ones that are not. So what about those leaders? What makes them special? And there are 4 levers that we found, 4 areas that they all had in common, and they did all 4 levers together. So this was a little bit of calisthenics that they needed to make sure they were pulling them all. The first one is setting an internal carbon price. The second is that they have transition plans, not just targets, transition plans. Third is that they link their executive pay to climate and sustainability targets. And finally, that they engage in their supplier and their value chain. So those are key factors that essentially, if they're disclosing against those, if they're engaging in those factors, we're seeing a really strong correlation with those that are in the leaders category.
Plenty of clues there. Somebody says, I need to improve our CDP score to justify the time spent on disclosure. Is there a plan to enhance the output to help gap analysis on scores?
Yeah, a great question. Obviously, we're here to help. Part of that is what, CDP is here to do, is we want to be able to encourage people to understand where perhaps some of the questions were not answered in a way that were best practice or what was being looked for. So I'd encourage anyone who is asking that question to get in touch with how it is that we can be more helpful. But I also think that it is a journey. And if you're recognizing a CDP score as being valuable, then it does take a little bit of investment. How can you make that investment useful, not just for CDP? Right? How is it that you can make the information you surface useful for your own business every day, profitability? And actually, I'm not just talking, isn't this nice? You should be thinking about every data point. How is it helping people, planet, and profit? So our supply chain members alone last year recognized $13 billion worth of cost savings off the back of the data that they surfaced over the course of the last few years through CDP. And again, this was something that they've shared with us because they are looking at this from a point of view of let me digest this data and understand how I can make changes to my own business. It's not just about cost savings, it's about opportunity. So if you keep thinking, well, how is it that it's going to affect my core business? That's when things like $16 trillion worth of opportunity has been surfaced over the course of the last 3 years through CDP disclosures. And Here in the UK, if we're going to localize it, we're sitting in London today. It's over $540 billion worth of opportunity that surfaced just from UK disclosures. And you might say, Tom, okay, if there's opportunity, if it costs more than its benefit, what's the point? $540 billion worth of opportunity from UK disclosures alone versus $130 billion worth of cost. I'd take that math any day. So being able to surface opportunities is part of what we're also looking to achieve. It's not just about mitigating risk. It's not just about box ticking. And in fact, if that's the way you approach it, you're never going to see the real value, and others will. Those that are leaders in their fields are looking at sustainability as a competitive advantage, and we've got the numbers to prove it.
Right. Thank you, Sherry. 25 years CDP, and there's a reason you're still a massive part of the conversation, and thanks for giving us some insight into how reporting disclosure can deliver real impact and benefit. Thank you.
Well, thank you
very much.